Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consol, your host. Two quick things before introducing you to my guest. First, I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast by clicking on the follow button and also clicking on the bell icon so you are alerted to each new edition of the program. Second, in addition to being the producer of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I've written 4 books, 3 novels, and 1 short story collection. In the episode notes, you will find a short link to my Amazon page and all 4 of those titles. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Vauhini Vara. She is a writer, journalist, editor, fiction writer, essayist, and playwright. I'm not going to go through all the awards that she has won or been nominated for, other than a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for her debut novel, no less, The Immortal King Rao. But she began her career in journalism as a technology reporter at the Wall Street Journal and later launched and edited and wrote the business section for the New Yorker's website. Since then, her writing has also appeared in the New York Times Magazine, The Atlantic, Wired, and many other publications. She is a Business Week contributing writer and can sometimes be found working as a story editor at the New York Times Magazine. Her debut novel, again, The Immortal King Rao, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. And her story collection, This is Salvaged, was longlisted for the Story Prize and the Mark Twain American Voice and Literature Award, and named by The New Yorker, Publishers Weekly, and others as a notable book of the year. A nonfiction book titled Searches, Selfhood in the Digital Age was published earlier this year. Searches is a personal exploration of how technology companies have both fulfilled and exploited the human desire for understanding and connection. Vara was born in Saskatchewan, Canada, as a child of Indian immigrants and grew up there and in Oklahoma and Seattle, the Seattle suburbs as well. She lives in Colorado now with her husband, the writer Andrew Olshu, and their son. Vauhini Vara, welcome to Novelist Spotlight.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I'm excited about this.
Let me start at Wall Street Journal, which happens to be, in my estimation, the best written newspaper in America. It's beautifully reported, it's beautifully written. I also consider it more objective than any major newspaper out there. Sometimes tell people, read headlines in the New York Times, Washington Post, just the headlines, and then the Wall Street Journal. And you see, the Wall Street Journal plays a much more in the middle.
Yeah.
And I know that is often regarded as a very conservative magazine, but I tell people that's the editorial pages. If you look at the news pages, it's very different. Did you happen to work, your time probably didn't coincide with his, but Bill Blundell used to be the writing and reporting coach for the Wall Street Journal. Are you familiar?
Yeah, no, I am familiar with him. We did not intersect, but his influence was very deeply felt during the time that I was there. So people would often say, think about writing it this way, or think about writing in this way. It's something Bill Blundell used to say.
He wrote the book, The Art and Craft of Feature Writing, best journalism book I've ever read. In fact, I was so impressed with it. I brought him in to talk to my reporting staffs on 2 different occasions. He had already retired by then and was working on novels at the time. And I remember him saying, the thing about writing a novel is you have to be willing to take a lot of copy and just throw it in the trash can because you've got to keep working at it. And it's not always going to come out at the level that you need it to come out. What was you were a technology writer at the Journal, and since then you've moved on to other publications. What did your journalism career, whether it's at the Wall Street Journal and then your subsequent publications, did that prep you for fiction writing in any sense? They're very different. I know that, having gone through it myself, but do you feel like it prepped you in any way for writing novels and short story collections?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think something that we don't talk about often is the way in which fiction is, like, we talk about fiction as if it's all made up. But of course, like, the writer and reader often are meant to have a shared understanding of the things in a novel or a story that are meant to be grounded in, like, the real world in which we live. So, for example, if something is set in the year 2009 in the United States, we expect the president to be Barack Obama, right? And So because of that, I think a lot about what in my fiction is meant to be non-fictional, sort of like what the contract between me and the reader says about what is intended to be understood as potentially made up and what's intended to be understood as representing the real world. And because I write, especially in my novel, about technology, I wanted my novel, which is about technology and set largely in an imagined future, to be grounded in some facts about the actual technology industry and its trajectory. I didn't want it to be like I didn't want it to all be so made up that it had no relation with the world that we live in. And so a lot of research went into that book and a lot of thinking about the trajectory that had gotten us to where we were at the time that I was writing the book and what it might look like if we imagined another trajectory out from there.
So tell me, is it a blessing or a curse to be married to a fellow writer?
For me, it's a blessing. I am married to a fellow writer who also teaches creative writing and is an excellent reader. And so, luckily for me, my husband Andrew is my typically my first reader of my creative work, and then also often of the journalism I'm working on. And it helps me. Yeah, I mean, I know people sometimes say it's a curse. We certainly don't. I read this article once about Michael Chabon and Ayelet Waldman, the married writers who live in the Bay Area.
Mhm.
And it talked about how they sit in an office together with back to back desks so that their backs are facing each other and they both write at the same time in the same room. And that sounds awful to me. So I'm not suggesting that being married to a writer looks like that for me and my husband, but I definitely benefit from his writing background. And we sit down to dinner every night and can like have interesting conversations about our shared field and artistic lives in a way that like I can't imagine it being otherwise. So yeah, I appreciate it.
Is there anything that Andrew has repeatedly found in your copy or brings up more than anything, or maybe just an incantation that's kind of like, don't forget this? Is there anything that is repeated from his lips to your ears, whether it's your actual copy that he's evaluating or just kind of a incantation or mantra?
Yes. I mean, I think this relates actually to what you were saying about the Wall Street Journal. So, my training as a journalist came from the Wall Street Journal, and I thought a lot and learned a lot while at the Wall Street Journal about how to let facts speak for themselves, rather than having my own subjective analysis drive a piece of reporting. That was very true at the Wall Street. Like that was the goal at the Wall Street Journal. I don't think it's some universal generic goal that we should always strive toward, but that was sort of how I learned to do journalism. These days, I write for magazines, and I think the expectation with magazine stories is that one's subjective perspective is somewhat more present on the page. And then I also write books. I write novels and short stories and essayistic nonfiction books, where again the expectation is of a very specific subjective perspective of the writer being on the page. And so I sometimes have to work. I always assume that my work, I think, like exists a lot in subtext, and I assume that readers will sort of like do the analysis themselves and pick up on the subtext. And very often, Andrew will say to me, I think I know because I know you what you're intending to have come across with this, but I don't know that the reader will. Maybe you should just say it outright if that's what you're trying to get across.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're respecting your readers, what you're doing and trying to do. There's just, but Andrew catches once in a while that this one you're going to have to fill in the blank because I'm not sure the reader is going to really come connect with this.
Yeah, yeah.
So you obviously writing attracted you. You came into the journalism profession. Did you always have an intent for fiction writing, or is that something that dawned on you along the way? You just decided, well, this is kind of my next step.
No, I always wanted to be a fiction writer. In fact, I think I wanted to be a fiction writer before I wanted to be a journalist. I remember a conversation with my mom in middle school where I said to her I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. And she said to me, and this is very accurate, she said to me, I don't think that that's a real job, but but the one job I know of where you can make a living writing is journalism. And she wasn't wrong, because I think, as successful as I think I have been as a writer of books, I don't make a living writing those books. I make a living doing all kinds of other things, including journalism. So writing itself on its own still isn't a bill paying career for me. But that comment stuck with me, and I started doing student journalism in high school and then college. But that whole time I was working on fiction as well. And I minored in creative writing in college. And so, sort of my entire writing life, I have been doing both. I've been doing both journalism and more creative writing.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Stanford.
Stanford. And what was your major? You minored in creative writing. Your major was?
So I minored in creative writing, and you'll appreciate this, economics,
Mm,
and I majored in international relations.
gotcha. Interesting. So, um, you, before I ask you to talk a little bit about Immortal King Rao, and am I pronouncing, is it Rao or?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Because it's a famous restaurant in New York City called Rayo's and all
Oh,
that.
is
But
that how always assumed that was pronounced Rouse?
no, I believe it's actually Rayo's. Yeah, I'll tell you the
Okay.
truth. But what are you working on now that you can share with us that without, compromising anything?
Um, I'm working on a couple of things. You mentioned in the introduction a play. I workshopped a version of this play, which was an adaptation of an essay I had written, which is part of the new book, in 2024 at the Denver Center for Performing Arts. And I've been working on revising that play. And so I'd like to finish that play. I have a new play in mind that would be an adaptation of a story in my story collection called I, Buffalo. And then I've been working since 2020 on my next book, which is a novel. And it has to do with some of the concerns that appear across all of my work, having to do with technology and individual agency.
Interesting. Okay. I hesitated before I asked you that question because the previous question, I guess it was, you were talking about this isn't a, well, Bret Easton Ellis. I just by accident, ran across a video of him on YouTube being interviewed. And he said, writing is not my profession. It's my hobby. It's what I love to do. That's not how I pay the bills, although he's been quite successful with his writing.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
I bet it depends on his lifestyle. I bet you could pay some bills with what he
Yes,
makes.
yes, I think so too, especially when they're made into movies and so on.
Yeah.
But he made the point that I love to write and I write when I'm inspired. I'm an emotional writer. And he says, I'm not under contract to produce a book right now. And I think basically he never is. And he says, when I eventually create something, then I take it to the publishing house and say, hey, I've written this. How about publishing it? And of course, they're always happy to do it because his name precedes him. But it's
Yeah.
that sort of thing where an awful lot of people want to make it a profession. In his case, it's a passion, and I'm sure in your case, you've known for a long time that you wanted to be a fiction writer. So you've written short stories as well as novels. Talk about the difference between a short story collection or writing short stories and writing a full length novel. Do you have a preference between the two? What are the pros and cons of or pluses and minuses of each?
I mean, I think about form and function when I write. I think maybe especially because I write across so many different genres, it always feels to me, and it's a hard question to answer because I think so much of this is sort of intuitive, but it always feels to me that there is a natural form for whatever message that I'm delivering in my writing. And so sometimes that form is a novel, sometimes that form is a short story, and sometimes that form is nonfiction. And it sort of depends what I'm trying to get across and what the relationship is, what the agreement is that I'm trying to make with a reader. And it's really hard for me to articulate, even to myself, like why something appears to me as a novel versus a story. There's some kind of magic that takes place that I can't put a finger on.
Have you written a short story where while you were in progress, you said, whoa, this thing's taking on a much larger life. I see there's a lot more to say here. I think I've got a potential novel in the making.
No, I know that happens to people all the time. It has not happened to me yet.
So tell us about the Immortal King Rao. It's my understanding it was 13 years in the making, so it was incubating for a long time. And was when you say 13 years in the making, assuming that I got that number right, um, was it basically a kind of again incubating, or were you actually getting copy on the page along the way?
Well, I started writing it in 2008, actively writing it. I mean, I think I had a first draft of it done by 2010 yeah, 2010. So 2 years later. And then I was writing and revising and writing and revising pretty continuously until it was published in 2022.
You know, you must have been kind of stunned when, I mean, I think any author, unless you've got maybe John Updike or Philip Roth, uh, all of a sudden you're told you're being shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize. How were you alerted to that? How did they contact you? Did they contact you by phone, by email, what have you?
That's one where they never contact you. I mean, I think they contact you if you win, but I was scrolling, I was on Twitter still back then, and we were in Spain because we were living in Spain for a year during my husband's sabbatical a couple of years ago. And I was sitting, it was evening there, and I was scrolling on Twitter before getting on a phone call and saw that they were announcing the Pulitzer Prizes. And as a journalist, especially, I'm always interested in those announcements. And so I was sort of like following it, scrolling on Twitter, and I saw that they were announcing the fiction prize. And so I clicked to watch the live stream. And somehow, right in the moment that I clicked, I saw my book and was like, wait a minute, that is this a dream? Is that really happening? And nobody ever contacted me after all. That was it. Like, I think, my publisher maybe talked to the people at the Pulitzer people to figure out what kind of little badge to put on the book. But otherwise, that's actually it.
So, what were you looking to accomplish, and obviously did accomplish, given the book's accolades? What were you looking to accomplish with the Immortal King Rao?
I wanted to write a book about what the world might look like if we were to continue along the trajectory of sort of rapacious technological capitalism that we had appeared to be on around the time that I was writing the book. Um, and I wanted to write about how we got there and the way in which like the roots of this phenomenon hadn't started in the 2000s or even the 90s or even the 1970s when personal computers started coming out, but way back in history. And so that was the goal of the book.
Talk about your writing regimen, Wahini. What is when you're working on a fiction project? What is your routine?
I have no routine. I sometimes, and maybe this is why it takes me 10 plus years often. Sometimes I am writing from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. Sometimes I am not writing at all for 2 years. I am talking here specifically about book writing. When I'm not writing for 2 years, it's usually because I'm working on journalism in the meantime. But I've never successfully created a consistent schedule for myself. I mean, I think that is bound up in the economics of being a writer. We're not paid typically for our work on a book until we finish the book. And so other things that do pay the bills keep getting in the way. But it's also the case that I tend not to be a particularly regimented person in terms of how I operate. And so I find that I write better when I give myself the flexibility to write the way that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, you're busy. You're writing for publications. You've got a son. You've got a husband. It's a busy life. So it sounds a little bit catch as catch can along the way. But then you do have these intensive periods, as you were saying, nine. You know, it could be like a working day, a 9 to 5 while you're working on. You do have those days where you're putting in many hours on a fiction project.
I do. And I tend to, I mean, when I when I'm in those periods, I tend to have a lot of stamina for it. Oftentimes those periods take place when I'm at like a writing residency, for example, where somebody's given me a nice place to stay for free and is feeding me, and all I'm asked to do is write all day. So it makes it easy to spend the whole day writing.
How has your writing changed over the course, your fiction writing specifically changed over the course of your writing life, Vauhini? How have you seen it gravitate? Do you see, other than becoming a better writer, because everybody becomes a better writer if they're writing, but qualitatively, maybe emotionally, spiritually, because we attach so many things to writing depending on who we are. How how has it changed along the way?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's the case that I always am interested in taking on a new challenge. And so when I wrote my first novel and my first story collection, my goal with the next book, which is the one I'm working on now, was to do something not only totally different from what I'd done in the past, but to, again, like I hopefully did with the first two books, do something that was different from anything else that existed. And so if that's your goal, you're always kind of trying to remake the form with every project. Which was certainly the goal with the nonfiction book, which that just came out, which was very is very unusual in form, and I think will be the case with the new novel. But I'm not. It's too early for me to even know how that'll be the case yet.
What direction do you think you'll trend in the coming years? I mean, you're writing novels, you're writing short stories, you're a playwright, you write narrative nonfiction. Is your intent, or is the vibe right now that you're feeling that you're going to have a hand in all of that stuff, or do you think you're starting to trend towards one specific channel?
If I had to guess, I would say I would continue to do all of the above. I mean, I think part of the reason I keep adding new genres to the list of genres that I am interested in is that, like I said, I'm always trying to use writing in a new way, not because of the I want the end product to be different from what I've done in the past, but because it's literally more interesting to me to write in a new way during the writing itself. Like I find it uh more generative. I learn more doing it that way. And so if I were to guess, I would say I'll probably continue to work in the genres I've worked in the past, and continue to find new genres. The one genre in which I don't think I'm any good is poetry. That's the one. I took a poetry class in college. I haven't pursued it further, and I feel intimidated by poetry. But yeah, no, I'd love to continue to sort of stretch how I use writing.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Let me ask you though, was there a turning point in your writing life when something happened, whether it was a something serendipitous or a eureka moment or something somebody told you, a piece of advice or anything like that? Or it may be a time when you just realize, hey, you know what, I'm going to be okay. I'm good at this. I see now that I'm good at it, and I'm on the right path. Was there a turning point?
I can't think of a particular turning point. I do often tell students of mine about a class I took when I was in college with the writer Tobias Wolff, in which I asked him, I think it was me who asked the question, or somebody else asked him, like, what distinguished the writers he had taught who had actually gone on to be writers, publishing books and so forth, from the ones who hadn't. And he very calmly and assuredly said that the only difference is that the ones who had become writers in their adult lives were the ones who kept doing it, and insisted on continuing to do it even when there were setbacks. And I remember finding that to be frustrating and not really believing it when I was in college. And now thinking about that advice, I find it kind of calming, because it suggests that there's some agency that the writer themselves has in a situation like that.
You know, Stephen King in his book on writing said, when you sit down at the screen or the notebook, whatever it might be, um, you got to bring an attitude to it. And then he explained kind of what his attitude was. Do you consciously bring a mindset or attitude to the keyboard when you sit down to write a piece of fiction, Vauhini? Is that something that's conscious, or do you sit down and you write?
No, I bring like wild, frenetic, confused energy. So maybe that's my attitude. That's the attitude I bring. The attitude is I have no idea what's about to happen. Anything could happen here.
So magic sometimes happens, magic strikes. Do you have a muse? Is there
Like
something
it.
that serves as a muse, or have you ever had? I once read something where a writer said, when you're really in the channel, it's like you're not writing, you're reading copy. Your fingers are moving, you're reading the copy. Now, I don't know if that's BS or not, because that sounds very, very rare to me. But definitely magic happens at times when a person's working at it assiduously. Um, what's it like
Yeah,
for
I mean,
you when it clicks?
I think what's actually happening when we think magic is happening is that um our subconscious is being brought to the fore in our self-expression. So oftentimes like we're self-expressing very consciously, and there can be times in our writing lives where the subconscious is allowed to express itself through the writing. um Sinead O'Connor in I was watching this documentary about Sinead O'Connor in a plane a couple months ago, and she said that when she's writing, and or when she believes that when people write and they think that they're like channeling some greater force and they're not really writing, it's just coming out through their fingers. What's actually happening there is that their subconscious is speaking, and it feels so foreign or magical, because like the role of our subconscious is to be underneath, right, the our conscious thought. And I think a lot of writing is about trying to give that that way of thinking and feeling some like a place for expression.
So what is a good day of writing for you? How would you characterize a good day of writing? I mean, do you judge by word count? Do you judge by qualitatively? Is there something you feel emotionally at the end of the session?
That's a good question. I mean, I think if I feel that I've discovered something about what I'm working on that I hadn't understood before through the writing itself, that's an exciting writing day.
What characteristic do you possess that what is the most indispensable in terms of being a fiction writer? Is there something you can point to that my ability to do what I'm doing would be diminished if I didn't have this particular characteristic that's part of my makeup?
Maybe curiosity.
And how does that express? I mean, do you do a lot of research for your books, or is a lot of? I mean, you are a journalist, which means you're always doing research. So you've got a lot of input. So is that curiosity just is it something that is being fed already by your day job, so to speak?
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, I think I couldn't have a job that didn't engage my curiosity. So yeah, I'm talking about research, but I'm also just talking about sort of allowing oneself to be curious rather than afraid, curious about rather than afraid of the sort of problems that present themselves on the page. You know, when something seems intractable, one impulse is to kind of run away from it, and the other is to lean into it and ask one and say, huh, that's interesting. I wonder what's happening here. And I think that impulse serves me well as a writer.
You know, Stephen Pressman wrote a book called The Art of, not The Art of War, The War of Art. And he talked about how you need to sit down, write on your schedule, whatever it might be, and not worry about the outcome that day. And when you're done, you're done, and you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. We hear a lot about the temperamental artist. I didn't really know what that meant until I started writing myself, but I'm curious whether you're emotionally affected by a bad day of writing. Does it bring you down? Do you need to be kind of, um, kind of re-inspired by your husband or your son or just daily life?
Yeah. Yes, the answer is yes. But it doesn't feel like that fact doesn't trouble me particularly existentially. I mean, I think sometimes we treat writing or art in general as if it's this sort of something special and different from other things we do in life. But I don't know that having a frustrating writing day is like any more existentially frustrating than having a frustrating day in any other number of jobs. So yeah, I mean that exists, but it doesn't feel particular to writing or to art for me.
So, talk a little bit about why you do write. I mean, you obviously you have a passion for it. When you have those good days of writing, you produce work on what are the emotional rewards or mental rewards of writing in your case?
I mean, I find that for myself, and I think for a lot of writers, we write because there's something that we don't understand, and the writing itself, almost like talking to a friend or otherwise using language, helps us understand something that we didn't previously understand. And so that's for me, that's the goal.
What authors inspired you along the way? I mean, do you have a favorite author or two or three that were particularly inspiring for you and kind of set you on the path?
No, but my favorite book is Moby Dick. I love that book. um
Tell me
uh
why. Why don't you elaborate on that a little bit? What is it about Moby Dick? I mean, obviously it's a landmark book. What was it that inspired you about it?
I appreciated how experimental it was, especially sort of at the time that it was being published. The way in which it contained both fictional elements and pages and pages of non-fictional elements too, and found a form that could encompass both of those. And I admire the way in which it's a sort of systems book. It's a book about the way the world works. And yet it's also very grounded in the individual lives of people, including people who are marginalized in society.
What do you consider to be the strongest element of your writing game? I mean, some people are really great with
My writing
dialogue.
game.
Some people, yeah, I mean, there's a
It makes me feel
characterization,
like some kind of
pacing.
baseball player or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or, and maybe it's easier to answer this question if you channeled Andrew right now. Maybe he says, "Wow, you're especially good at this or that," or answer on your own behalf. I'm curious whether there's a particular element to your writing that you feel like this is my kind of my superpower.
There isn't. I will say that I tend to be pretty allergic to convention. I'm always trying to like break with existing convention. And so I guess the word for that is originality, to always be trying to do something new. And I do think that's something that interests me and hopefully comes out of my work.
So when you're creating characters, how do you go about creating characters, or what are you looking to do with characters? Um, I realize I sometimes ask questions other people don't ask, but I'm curious as to how you approach characters and their development.
I mean, I think they're probably all a version of me. And then when I'm writing, um, in fiction at least, characters who are narrators. And then when I'm writing nonfiction, I am interested in understanding why people behave the way they behave, not just on the level of individual personality or character, but with respect to the communities and systems that shape them. And so I think, tend to see character, whether it's in fiction or nonfiction, as a not fiction or nonfiction, as a reflection of all these sort of broader concentric circles of existence.
Now, do you write for yourself or do you write for your readers?
I don't know that I would say that either is true. I mean, I think I tell students that any piece of writing doesn't really exist until a relationship is formed between the writer and an eventual reader through the reading of that text. But that requires both writing for myself and writing for the reader, sort of like having that dual perspective in my mind while I'm working.
I ask because there are people who say one of the biggest mistakes writers make is they're thinking about the readers, they're thinking about, and when you're thinking about the readers, sometimes you're thinking about, especially if you have not established yourself yet, which isn't the case with you, but to the new writer out there, if you're thinking about your readers, what you're really thinking about is the market, and you're writing to the market, and that's a mistake. You should write what that inner voice is telling you, what your instinct is, even if it seems, well, nobody writes like this, nobody sounds like this, so how am I possibly going to get it published? As you go forward and do it, because that's your instinct, and that's your greatest prospect of success, and also having a feeling that you're truly expressing yourself rather than working to meet the approval of a bunch of readers out there.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that, but that always confuses me because I mean, any piece of writing is ultimately meant to be a communication act, right? And so there's inherently an imagined addressee in that communication act. And so to me, it feels a little false to say one is writing only for oneself. It also seems limiting to equate a reader with a market, right? And I'm not conflating those two. I'm saying that like I'm interested in the actual human beings who might eventually read my book and in how to translate what I want to communicate onto the page in a way that's going to be legible to other people. um so I'm not talking about that in terms of market, and I certainly don't think that there's anything more valuable about writing a book that 10,000 people read than there is about writing a book that 50 people read.
Do you feel, I mean, you've got a following now. Do you feel any obligation to your readers? And if so, what is your obligation to the reader?
I mean, I feel an obligation to readers of a given text once they have started engaging with the text, right? So in a book, it feels like a book starts as a kind of contract with a reader, right? Like you're establishing a relationship. And I want to be very careful about that relationship in that particular textual exchange. I don't think at all about what somebody who loved my novel is going to think of my story collection or my nonfiction book, or what somebody who reads my journalism is going to think when they pick up my when they watch a play of mine. I don't think about that at all.
Have you ever had bouts of writer's block?
It's hard to say because I don't as you can probably tell, I don't really beat myself up about not writing at times. So I mean, I think the answer is no, but there's certainly long periods where I haven't written. And that's probably because during those periods, something else is calling to me and writing isn't. But no, I've never had writer's block as writer's block that I can remember.
Yeah, yeah. I had an English teacher back. I never forgot this. I was back in junior high school, and he had said, I remember his name, Mr. Gallagher, and he had said that he had a writer come to him and say that he was having writer's block. And he said, well, that's a simple solution. All you have to do is go to a library, you pull five or six interesting books off the shelves, you sit down and you just read passages from them, and your writer's
Mm.
block will go away. Now, I've never felt that either. I don't know that I've ever had writer's block, but I have used that technique just to kind of get in the pick up the vibe, get in the channel. I think when I read other authors, I sometimes think it's sort of like it reconfirms that there's things that you can do in the text that you just kind of forget you can do because you kind of, I think sometimes people get locked into um, kind of a certain style or voice and forget that there's some other opportunities there that can be
Yeah.
inspirational. I remember I had an author on the program and I happened to mention Milan Kundera and she just you know, turned to protoplasm, just said his books, he was doing things in his books I didn't even know you could do with fiction
Mm.
writing. It just opened this whole new vista for me, and that he was a hugely influential author for me. Uh,
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Yeah.
you
I
don't
mean, I
have
think
you don't have a Milan Kundera. You don't have a particular author that really was a breakthrough for you, though.
I
is what I'm
don't,
hearing.
but I started writing actively in college, and my college classmates who ended up being really close friends who continue to be good friends of mine ended up all being celebrated authors as adults. And there was this sort of like alchemy that took place. And so we really sort of learned from one another and alongside one another. And so when I think of, and the same was true for me in graduate school, I learned so much more from my colleagues and classmates than I did from, the masters who had published books 50 years earlier. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I tend to learn a lot from writing and reading in community.
Now, are you a organic writer? Do you write without an outline, or are you an outliner?
I do not outline. No, I can't even. I mean, I always outline my magazine stories, my journalism, but I never outline my creative writing. I don't know why.
So, yeah, so you like it to develop organically. I mean, uh, do you ever find that when you're allowing it to just kind of develop on its own, that you find yourself, well, you mentioned you alluded to, finding problems on the page, and the curiosity comes into play there. But I'm curious whether it's this sort, you've had situations where you feel like you've kind of written yourself into a corner, whether it's been the entire manuscript or a particular chapter, because it's organic and because you didn't take the
Mm-hmm.
time to. Yeah, I think secretly every author wants to be an organic writer, just do it spontaneously. It comes from within, because outlining almost seems like it's constraining in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. The reason I outline my not my journalism and not my fiction is that with journalism, it is the reporting that drives what's gonna end up in the piece. Like I have the material already, and therefore I can sort of determine the best order in which to shape the material. Whereas with more creative work, you don't know what the material it is. You're sort of generating the material as you go. And so that's why it's impossible for me in more creative work to outline, because how do you know what the elements are going to be until you just write your way toward them?
Hmm. Hmm. What is your best advice to? I'm sure you've had aspiring novelists ask, or you've been in teaching situations. Uh, for that aspiring novelist, what is your advice to somebody who wants to be a published author? Is a piece of advice that you might give them that you would share with any novice writer?
I think I would repeat the advice that Tobias Wolff gave me in college, which is to just keep doing it and doing it, keep writing, and importantly, keep reading, and and have the goal be to just develop your art and craft as a writer rather than to have some end goal like publishing a book, because publishing a book isn't particularly exciting in the end. The exciting part is the discoveries you make while you're doing the writing itself.
Yeah, I hear that advice a lot. I hear it repeatedly because it's true. I'm assuming it's the people who are persistent are the ones who really succeed at it.
Yeah.
It's very easy to, get some rejections and then say, I'm done with this. They don't see the brilliance in me. I'm done.
Right.
Now, let me use your imagination a little bit with this one. If you were having a dinner party at your house, you could invite any three novelists, living or dead. Who would you want at that table?
um I've answered this question before, and I'm going to give you the same answer I gave when I answered
Okay,
it before,
good, good.
which is my husband, the writer Andrew Altschul, and two of my close friends, Karan Mahajan and his wife, Francesca Mari, who live in Providence, Rhode Island, and I never get to see them. And they all happen to be writers.
Wow, wow. Um, what about are you a TV watcher? I mean, do you watch any of the streaming series on Netflix or Amazon Prime, any of those platforms?
I do watch TV, but we always have sort of one show at a time. And right now we're watching this Spanish show that is on a Spanish network called RTVE. And so I haven't watched anything else, and I have like no frame of reference when it comes to current American English language television.
That's what you're watching currently, you said.
I'm watching the show called Cuéntame cómo pasó.
Okay, you speak Spanish because you were in Spain with your husband during your husband's sabbatical. So do you actually speak the language?
I started learning that year in 2022, and I've been actively learning since then. So I speak decent Spanish now.
So if you were to go back in time and had an opportunity to tell a 25-year-old Vauhini Vara, uh, give her a piece of advice, um, or just a watchword of some kind, what would you tell her?
Keep going, and it's going to go fine.
That's what everybody needs to know, right? It's going to be
Yeah,
okay,
it's going to be
and
okay.
if only
Yeah,
we had that kind of foresight, or if only we could do that
exactly.
kind of projection. Um, is there any influential? I'm curious about, obviously we've all probably read a lot of writing books. Is there any particular writing book that was stand out for you?
No, I don't really read writing books. I mean, I like going to the library and paging through them, but no, I don't have a particular one.
I see. Okay. And do you have any do you have any regrets as a writer? Is there anything that you didn't do or didn't get done that you wish you could take a, kind of well, you could always take a second bite at the apple. That's really
Mhm.
not an issue, but I don't know if you've got any regrets along the way.
I mean, with every book I've written, I always notice things that I would have changed if the book was still live in my hands and I could. Um, and so that represents a kind of regret. And yet I feel very comfortable with the fact that at some point with each of my three books, I had to let the book go into the world and make its way. But no, nothing on any existential level.
Now, we talked about your writing regimen, but I'm curious. One of the things I didn't ask you about is whether you do anything. Do you have any companionship in terms of you're listening to music, you're burning candles, anything like that puts you in the frame?
No, I don't have any particular routine. I can kind of write anywhere. I can write at my desk. I can write, while my kid and his friends are playing across the room next to me. I can write at the airport. I can write on an airplane. So for whatever reason, yeah, I've never been the kind of writer who needs any particular circumstances in order to write.
Do you use are you on a laptop when you're writing, or do you sometimes use so some writers believe in, handwriting. They feel like it's a stronger hand to brain connection. Or are you always on a keyboard?
I do both. I subscribe to that thinking about the hand to mind connection. And I do find that it's strong when I'm writing with a pen in a notebook. So I've had periods when I've done that. Right now, I'm working on a manuscript that I originally wrote that way and then transcribed, and am now working on the computer.
So, final question. Let me ask about what's on your fiction writing bucket list. Is there, um, when your bio is written, what do you want to have accomplished? I mean, that elusive Pulitzer Prize is still sitting out there. You've already been shortlisted, so obviously your name would be very present if you wrote something else that got nominated. What do you think about that?
Know that
What
I
you
care
want
about.
what you want your bio to basically include? You don't sound
I
like
don't think I care about any of that. I mean, I am interested in doing journalism that exposes truths that are hidden in very literal ways. So, that make things public that previously were private, especially when that relates to power. I'm interested in doing that. I want to do more of it. Uh, I want to write creatively, publish creative work that breaks convention, and I hopefully have done that already, and I hope to continue to do it in new ways. But for me, it's like it's more about the work itself than about the recognition for the work.
well, actually, I do have one more question. How do you think journalism is doing and the United States in terms of holding power to account, as the phrase goes?
Medium well. I mean, I'm not as maybe as a journalist myself, I'm not as critical as some because I understand the constraints under which journalists are working. I mean, I think my impression is that journalists themselves are very eager to do that kind of work. I mean, anybody in the journalism field writing for major publications could quit tomorrow and triple or quadruple our income working in PR for companies. And so we're doing this work because it's important to us. I do think that the organizations that employ us and that publish our work tend to be more conservative. And I don't mean politically conservative, but I mean conservative when it comes to risk about what they publish and what the consequences of that might be.
Vauhini, thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me. It was a good conversation.